Have you ever announced a goal out loud and felt the strange, quiet urge to actually do it fade almost immediately? You told your friends you were starting the business. You posted about the diet, the degree, the big change. And for one warm, glowing moment, everyone said, "Amazing. So proud of you. You've got this." It felt like progress. It felt like momentum. And then, something shifted. The fire that was supposed to carry you through the hard, invisible, unglamorous months quietly went out. Not because you were lazy, not because you didn't want it badly enough, but because of something almost nobody explains to you. Your mind can be tricked into feeling finished, simply by being told it's noticed. This is the story of a different way, a quieter way. A way of moving through the world where your ambitions are not currency you spend on applause, but fuel you protect, in silence, until the work itself has something real to show. Somewhere in the chapters ahead, you're going to recognize exactly where you've been doing this without knowing it, and exactly what it's been costing you. Before we continue, if this is striking a nerve already, do one small thing for yourself. Hit subscribe, not for me, for the quieter, more focused version of you that's about to be built, chapter by chapter, starting right now. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The applause that steals your motivation. There is a strange and deeply counterintuitive truth sitting at the center of this entire journey, and I want to place it in front of you clearly, right at the start, because almost nothing that follows will make sense without it. Telling people about your goals can, in a very real and measurable way, make you less likely to achieve them. Say that back to yourself for a moment, slowly, because it runs against nearly everything you've been taught. You've been told, your whole life, that sharing your goals holds you accountable, that saying it out loud makes it real, that the people around you, once they know what you're working toward, will help keep you honest, keep you moving, keep you on track. It sounds true, it feels true, and for a specific, narrow kind of goal, one with built-in external checkpoints, like training for a race alongside a group who will notice if you stop showing up, there's something to it. But for the vast majority of deep, personal, ambitious goals, the business, the book, the transformation, the long climb towards something that matters to you, a different mechanism is quietly at work underneath the encouraging words and warm reactions. And once you understand it, you will never announce a goal casually again. Here is what's actually happening at the level of the mind when you tell someone what you intend to do. Your brain, it turns out, has real difficulty distinguishing between talking about an identity and actually having earned it. When you say, out loud to another person, "I'm going to become someone who does this," and that person responds with recognition, nodding, congratulating, treating you, even briefly, as though you've already become that person, something in your mind registers a small, satisfying hit of completion, not because you've done anything yet, but because you've been seen as someone who has, and the mind, remarkably, often can't tell the difference between being seen that way and actually being that way. The social recognition itself starts to feel like partial payment on a debt that hasn't been earned. This isn't a flaw unique to you. It's not weak willpower, and it's not some personal failing you should feel ashamed of. It's a well-documented pattern in the psychology of motivation, and once you see it clearly, you'll recognize it everywhere, in your own history and in the lives of nearly everyone around you. Let me tell you about a man named Idris. Idris had, for years, wanted to write a novel, not casually, deeply, the way some people carry a creative ambition like a quiet second heartbeat underneath their ordinary life. Finally, at 34, he decided this was the year, and in that first burst of excitement, he did what felt completely natural. He told everyone, his family, at a dinner, his closest friends, over drinks, a wider circle, in a proud, hopeful post, announcing the project and the timeline he'd set for himself. The response was everything he could have hoped for. Warmth, encouragement, genuine excitement from people who loved him. For about a week, Idris felt unstoppable, full of the specific, electric energy of a person whose big dream has just been witnessed and celebrated by everyone who matters to him. And then, almost exactly as that week ended, something changed. He sat down to actually write, and found the drive that had felt so vivid just days earlier, strangely, inexplicably thinner. Not gone entirely. He still cared about the novel, but the urgency, the hunger, the thing that had kept him awake at night imagining scenes and characters, had quietly dimmed, as though some of its charge had already been spent somewhere else. It took Idris almost a year of starting and stalling, of feeling a confusing guilt every time someone asked, with genuine warmth, "How's the book going?" to understand what had actually happened. He hadn't lost interest in writing. He had, without realizing it, already received a meaningful piece of the reward his mind was seeking from the entire project. The experience of being seen as a writer, of being congratulated, of having his identity as someone who writes a novel acknowledged by the people whose opinion mattered most to him, and he had received all of that before he'd written a single real page. This is the quiet trap hiding inside almost every proud announcement of a big goal. The mind, seeking the reward of recognition, doesn't actually care very much whether that recognition arrives before or after the work. It simply registers the recognition when it comes, and once registered, a portion of the motivational fuel that was supposed to carry you through the actual difficult work has already, invisibly, been spent. Think about how differently this plays out for someone who says nothing at all. A person quietly working on their novel, in private, receiving no congratulations, no warm nods of recognition, no social confirmation that they are already, in some meaningful sense, a writer. That person's mind has nowhere else to look for the reward except the actual work itself, and eventually, the actual finished pages. There is no early payment to dull the hunger. The full weight of the motivation stays intact, pointed entirely at the one thing that can actually satisfy it, doing the work and finishing it. I want to be precise here about what this chapter is arguing, because it would be easy to misunderstand it as advice to become secretive or isolated, and that isn't the point at all. There is an enormous difference between sharing a struggle honestly with someone you trust, which can offer real support, real comfort, real practical help, and announcing an ambition for the specific purpose of being seen as someone who has already achieved it. The first is connection. The second, however well-intentioned, is often a quiet, unconscious substitute for the work itself, dressed up as enthusiasm. Idris eventually found his way back to the novel, but the return required something deliberate. He stopped talking about it. Not out of shame, and not by cutting off the people who loved him, but by making a private, internal decision that the book would remain his, silently, until it was finished enough to speak for itself. He noticed, almost immediately, a shift in his own hunger for the work. Without an audience to perform his identity for, the only way left to satisfy the part of him that wanted to be a writer was to actually write. And so, slowly, quietly, month after unannounced month, he did. Here is what I want you to sit with, carrying forward into the rest of this journey. The applause you receive for announcing a goal is real. The warmth is real. The people offering it usually mean it sincerely, but that applause is not free. It draws down, quietly, from the exact same well of motivation that's supposed to carry you through the long, unglamorous middle of actually achieving the thing. And the earlier in the process you spend from that well, the less remains for you when the real, difficult work begins. This doesn't mean secrecy for its own sake, and it doesn't mean cutting yourself off from real support. It means becoming, deliberately, far more careful about when and why you speak about what you're building, protecting the hunger rather than spending it, until the work itself has something real to show. In the next chapter, we're going to look more closely at why silence, specifically, does something for focus and depth of work that constant sharing quietly undermines, and why some of history's most focused people guarded their process far more fiercely than they ever guarded their results. Chapter 2. What silence actually protects. There's a particular kind of depth that only becomes available to a mind that isn't constantly being interrupted by the question, even quietly, even in the back of its own awareness, what will people think of this? This question sounds harmless. It sounds, even, like a reasonable thing to consider. After all, most work eventually needs to reach other people, needs to be understood, needs to land well when it's finally shared. But I want to show you, in this chapter, how much this question, asked too early and too often during the actual process of creating or building something, quietly narrows the range of what you're capable of producing, and why silence, real and sustained, protects something in the creative and working mind that constant sharing simply cannot. Here's the mechanism worth understanding clearly. The moment you know other people are watching your process, even a small, supportive audience, even people who love you and want the best for you, some part of your mind begins, often without your conscious awareness, editing for their reaction. This isn't a character flaw. It's another piece of the same ancient social wiring we discussed back in Chapter 1, the wiring that cares, at a level deeper than conscious choice, about how the group perceives you. An audience, even a kind and encouraging one, activates that wiring, and once activated, it quietly begins shaping decisions that should, at that early stage, belong entirely to the work itself. This shows up in ways that are easy to miss from the inside. You choose the safer version of an idea instead of the strange, riskier one that might actually be better, because the safer version is easier to explain, easier to justify, easier to defend if someone asks about it. You abandon a promising but awkward early draft, not because it wasn't working, but because you can imagine, uncomfortably, what it would look like if someone saw it in that unfinished state. You rush toward a presentable version of something before it's actually ready, because the pressure of an audience, even an imagined one, makes the vulnerable, messy middle stage of real work feel unbearable to sit inside for very long. Let me tell you about a woman named Solveig. Solveig was a talented graphic designer who had, for years, built a habit of sharing her in-progress work constantly, posting early sketches, asking for feedback at every stage, narrating her creative process publicly as she went. On the surface, this looked like healthy openness, even admirable vulnerability. But Solveig, if she was honest with herself, had noticed something troubling about her own work over those years. It had become, gradually, safer, more polished at every stage, yes, but also more predictable, more calculated toward what she already knew her audience tended to respond well to, less willing to risk the genuinely strange, uncertain territory where her most original ideas had always seemed to live before she'd built the habit of sharing everything as she went. It took a specific project, a personal piece she'd decided, almost on impulse, not to share with anyone until it was completely finished, for Solveig to notice the difference directly, working in total privacy, with no audience checking in, no early feedback shaping her choices. She found herself taking risks she wouldn't have taken otherwise, trying an approach that felt genuinely uncertain, without needing to justify it to anyone, sitting with an ugly, unresolved middle stage for far longer than she normally would have tolerated, because no one was watching that stage, no one was going to see it, and so its unfinished ugliness carried none of the social weight it usually did. The piece that emerged, when she finally finished it, was different from her recent work in a way she immediately recognized, stranger, more distinctly hers, less shaped by the invisible, constant calibration toward what an audience already expected. She described the experience, afterward, as remembering something about her own creative voice that the years of constant sharing had slowly, quietly eroded, without her noticing it happening. This is worth understanding deeply, because it applies to nearly any kind of meaningful work, not just creative work in the narrow sense. A business idea, shared too early and too widely, tends to get shaped by the reactions of people who don't yet understand it as deeply as its creator does, sanded down toward whatever sounds safest and most immediately palatable in conversation, rather than developed fully according to its own internal logic. A significant personal change announced before it's actually underway tends to get discussed, debated, and reacted to by people whose opinions, however well-meaning, weren't asked for by the part of you that actually needs to do the quiet, internal work of changing. In nearly every domain, the presence of an audience, even a loving, supportive one, subtly reshapes the thing being made in ways that are not always improvements, and are often, in fact, a narrowing. I want to be careful here, because this is not an argument against ever seeking feedback, and it's not an argument that isolation is inherently virtuous. Feedback, offered at the right time, from the right people, is one of the most valuable resources available to anyone doing serious work. The distinction that matters is timing. and it's a distinction worth understanding precisely. Feedback sought deliberately, at a stage where the work has already found its own internal shape and simply needs sharpening, tends to genuinely improve it. Feedback, or worse, simple social reaction, absorbed constantly, from the very earliest, most fragile stages, before the work has had any chance to become fully itself, tends to prevent it from ever finding that shape at all. There's a useful image worth carrying forward from this chapter, one that captures something important about why early-stage privacy matters so much. Think of a young idea, the way you'd think of a seedling. A seedling needs a period of protected, undisturbed growth before it's sturdy enough to withstand the elements. Wind, heavy rain, the attention of animals that might disturb its still-forming roots. Expose it too early to too much handling, however well-intentioned, and you risk disturbing the very root structure it needs in order to eventually become strong enough to stand on its own. This is exactly what constant early sharing does to a fragile, forming idea, project, or personal transformation. It exposes something still finding its shape to forces, however kindly meant, that it isn't yet sturdy enough to be handled by without distortion. Solveig didn't abandon sharing her work entirely after that private project. She wasn't interested in becoming a recluse, and there was real value, she still believed, in eventually letting other people into her process. But she changed, permanently, when that sharing happened. She began protecting the earliest, most fragile stage of any new project as private, deliberately silent territory, a space where the work could find its own shape, according to its own internal logic, before being exposed to any outside reaction at all. Only once a piece had developed real structure, real internal coherence, did she begin inviting others in, and she noticed, consistently, that the work reaching that stage was stronger, stranger, and more distinctly hers than anything she'd produced during her years of constant, early sharing. Here's what I want you to carry forward from this chapter. Silence, in the early stages of meaningful work, is not secrecy for its own sake, and it's not about hiding from connection or support. It's protection for an idea, a project, a version of yourself still forming, still fragile, still finding its own shape. Protection from being prematurely handled by reactions, however well-meaning, that it isn't yet sturdy enough to absorb without being subtly, invisibly narrowed by them. In the next chapter, we're going to look at something closely connected to this, the specific difference between working for the sake of being seen working and working for the sake of the work itself, and why that difference determines almost everything about how deep and how good the final result can actually become. Chapter 3. Working to be seen versus working to build. There is a subtle but critical fork in the road that almost everyone crosses without realizing it, usually many times over the course of a single project, a single career, a single life. On one side of that fork, working because the work itself matters to you, because building the thing well is the actual point. On the other side, working, without quite admitting it to yourself, because you want to be seen working, seen as busy, seen as dedicated, seen as someone who is clearly, visibly, on their way to something impressive. These two paths can look, from the outside, almost identical. Both involve real effort, both involve long hours, real sacrifice, genuine tiredness at the end of a demanding day. But underneath that surface similarity, they produce radically different results, because they are, in the deepest sense, aimed at entirely different targets. And a mind aimed at being seen working will, almost inevitably, make different choices than a mind aimed purely at the work getting done well. Let's understand why this distinction matters so much in practice. A person working primarily to build something good asks, at every decision point, a fairly simple question: what does this project actually need right now? A person working, even partly, to be seen working, asks a subtly different, far more distorting question, often without realizing they're asking it at all. What would make this look impressive to the people watching? These two questions frequently point in different directions. The thing a project actually needs is often invisible, unglamorous, slow, the tedious debugging, the unremarkable 10th revision, the quiet research that produces no visible output for weeks. The thing that looks impressive to an audience is almost always something else entirely, a milestone worth announcing, a visible burst of activity, a story that photographs well. Let me tell you about a man named Torvald. Torvald ran a small manufacturing company, and for several years, he had built a genuine habit of documenting his work publicly, sharing updates, milestones, behind-the-scenes glimpses of the business, in a way that had, for a time, brought real attention and even some real customers to his growing operation. It felt for a long while like a clear win, visibility that translated into tangible business value. But somewhere along the way, Torvald began noticing something uncomfortable about his own decision-making that he couldn't quite name at first. He found himself gravitating, in subtle ways, toward projects and improvements that would make for a compelling update, rather than the projects that would most improve the actual business. A visually striking new piece of equipment got prioritized over a boring but critically important overhaul of the company's internal quality control process, because the equipment made for a far better photograph and a far more exciting story than the quiet, invisible work of fixing something that mostly showed up, if neglected, as a slow accumulation of costly errors nobody would ever see documented anywhere. It took a serious quality issue, one directly traceable to that neglected internal process, for Torvald to confront what had actually been happening beneath his visible, well-documented progress. He hadn't been running the business purely to build it well. Some meaningful portion of his decision-making, quietly and without his full awareness, had been shaped by what would make a good update, a good story, a good piece of visible evidence that things were going well. And that quiet distortion, compounded over months and projects, had genuinely cost the business something real. What changed for Torvald wasn't a decision to stop all public sharing. Again, as in the previous chapter, that's not the actual lesson here. What changed was a much more specific, deliberate discipline. Before making any significant decision about where to direct time and resources, he began asking himself a pointed question, one designed to catch exactly the distortion that had gone unnoticed for years. Am I choosing this because the business genuinely needs it, or because it would make a better story? He didn't always trust his first honest answer. At first, the pull toward the more storyable option was, he found, remarkably persistent, even once he knew to watch for it. But naming the question explicitly and asking it consistently gradually returned his decision-making to something closer to what the business actually needed, rather than what made the best content about the business. This pattern is worth recognizing far beyond the specific context of running a company, because it shows up almost everywhere meaningful work happens. Students who choose their course of study partly based on how impressive it will sound at a dinner party, rather than what will actually serve their genuine interests and capabilities. People who choose a visible, prestigious version of self-improvement, one that photographs well, that generates admiring comments, over a quieter, less impressive version that would actually address what's genuinely holding them back. Even relationships can fall into this trap, when the visible performance of a happy partnership, curated carefully for an audience, starts to matter more than the quiet, unglamorous, often invisible work of actually building real intimacy and trust. I want to name something important here about why this particular trap is so easy to fall into and so hard to notice from the inside. Being seen working and receiving recognition for it feels almost identical, moment to moment, to actually building something valuable. Both produce a kind of satisfaction. Both feel, in the moment, like progress. This is precisely why the distinction is so easy to miss. The felt experience of both paths can be remarkably similar, even though the actual outcomes they produce, given enough time, diverge enormously. A project built primarily to look impressive tends to accumulate a hollow kind of progress. Plenty of visible activity, plenty of documented milestones, but a curious thinness underneath, a lack of the deep, often invisible groundwork that actually makes something sturdy and lasting. There's a useful test worth carrying forward from Torvald's experience, one you can apply to almost any significant piece of work in your own life. Imagine for a moment that no one would ever know about this particular effort, that it would remain permanently invisible, with no update, no announcement, no recognition of any kind, ever. Would you still choose to do it, exactly as you're currently planning to do it? If the honest answer is yes, you're likely working from the first, healthier motivation, building because the thing itself matters. If the honest answer involves real hesitation, if some of your enthusiasm for the project noticeably deflates once you imagine it staying permanently unseen, that hesitation is worth taking seriously. It's often a sign that some meaningful portion of your motivation has quietly migrated from the work itself toward the audience for the work. And that migration, however natural and human it is, tends to produce work that's thinner and less durable than it could otherwise become. I want to be clear, again, that this isn't an argument for never sharing what you build, and it's not a claim that wanting recognition is shameful or wrong. Wanting to be seen, wanting your effort to be acknowledged, is a completely normal human desire, and there's nothing broken about feeling it. The issue arises specifically when that desire quietly starts directing the actual decisions of the work itself, when the question of what would look good begins to compete with, and sometimes override, the question of what the work genuinely requires. Recognizing when that shift is happening, the way Torvald eventually learned to, is one of the most valuable and least discussed skills available to anyone trying to build something that actually lasts. In the next chapter, we're going to look at what happens to your relationship with failure and mistakes when your process is private rather than public, and why the freedom to fail unseen might be one of the most underrated advantages a quiet worker has over a visible one. Chapter 4. The freedom to fail, where no one is watching. There is a particular kind of paralysis that only shows up once other people are watching your progress, and I want to spend this chapter looking at it closely, because it quietly limits far more people than most ever realize, often without them ever connecting the paralysis back to its actual source. Here's the pattern. Once you've announced a goal, once people know what you're working toward and are, even gently, watching for updates, every mistake you make along the way stops being simply a mistake. It becomes, in your mind, evidence. Evidence that might be witnessed, judged, and remembered by the very people whose good opinion you were hoping to earn through this whole effort in the first place. And once mistakes carry that social weight, something predictable happens. You start, often without realizing it, avoiding the kinds of mistakes that real learning actually requires. This matters enormously because nearly all serious growth, in a skill, in a business, in any meaningful undertaking, depends on a particular kind of experimentation that is, by its very nature, going to produce a large number of failed attempts before it produces anything worth showing. This is not a flaw in the process. It's how the process works, in every domain, without exception. But an audience, even a supportive one, changes the psychological cost of each individual failed attempt, and that changed cost, compounded across hundreds of small experimental decisions, can quietly steer a person away from the very experimentation their growth depends on. Let me tell you about a woman named Amara. Amara had decided, in her late 20s, to teach herself to paint, something she'd wanted to do for years but had never seriously attempted. In an early burst of enthusiasm, she began sharing her progress online, posting each new piece as she finished it, building a small, encouraging following of people genuinely rooting for her development. For a while, this felt wonderful, a source of motivation, a community cheering her on. But over time, Amara noticed something troubling about how she was actually painting. She had started, without deciding to, staying firmly within the range of techniques she already knew would produce a presentable result. She avoided the genuinely strange, uncertain experiments, the unfamiliar color combinations, the unconventional compositions, the techniques she'd never tried and had no confidence would work. Because those experiments, if they failed, which experiments very often do, would fail publicly, in front of an audience that had come to expect a certain steady, visible improvement from her. This is a subtle but devastating trap for anyone trying to genuinely develop a skill, because the experiments most likely to fail are very often, not coincidentally, the experiments most likely to produce real breakthroughs when they do succeed. Amara's public audience, entirely without meaning to, had quietly narrowed her practice down to the safe, reliable middle ground, competent, steadily improving, and, she came to realize with some discomfort, less genuinely adventurous than her private sketchbooks from years earlier, back when no one but her had ever seen what she was making. The turning point came when Amara decided, almost as an experiment in itself, to start a second, completely private practice alongside her public one, a sketchbook she showed no one, where she gave herself explicit permission to fail as often and as visibly to herself alone as the actual learning process required. The results were immediate and striking. Freed from any audience at all, she found herself trying combinations and techniques she would never have risked in her public work, most of which, honestly, did fail, exactly as failed experiments are supposed to. But a meaningful handful of them didn't fail. They produced something genuinely new, genuinely her own, unlike anything in her more cautious public portfolio. And those breakthroughs, developed entirely in private, eventually made their way, refined and confident, into the public work that her small audience noticed, with real enthusiasm, had suddenly taken a leap forward they couldn't quite explain. They couldn't explain it because they hadn't seen the actual mechanism behind it, a private space, entirely free of observation, where failure carried no social cost at all, and could therefore happen as often and as freely as genuine growth requires. I want to name something important about why this dynamic is so easy to overlook. The fear of failing in front of others rarely announces itself directly. Amara never consciously thought, in the moment, "I'm avoiding this experiment because I'm afraid of how it will look if it fails." The avoidance happened quietly, beneath conscious awareness, showing up simply as a vague preference for the safer choice, a slight reluctance toward the stranger option that felt, from the inside, like ordinary artistic judgment rather than social fear in disguise. This is precisely why the effect is so powerful and so underestimated. It operates almost entirely below the level where it could be easily noticed and corrected, disguising itself as taste, as caution, as simple preference, when its actual root is the quiet, constant awareness of being watched. There's a distinction worth drawing here between two different relationships to failure, because it clarifies exactly what private practice protects. Public failure tends to feel, even when it shouldn't, like a referendum on your competence or your identity, a visible data point that others might use to judge whether you're actually capable of what you're attempting. Private failure, by contrast, can return to being what it was always supposed to be in the first place: simple, neutral information. This attempt didn't work. Try the next variation. No identity at stake, no audience to disappoint, nothing at risk except the time spent on the attempt itself. And information gathered this freely, without the distorting weight of social risk attached to each data point, tends to accumulate far faster and far more honestly than information gathered under the watchful, well-meaning eyes of people hoping to see you succeed. Here is a practice worth carrying forward from Amara's experience, one you can apply to nearly any skill or project you're currently developing. Build, deliberately, a private space for the earliest, most experimental stage of your work, one genuinely free from any observation at all, where the explicit purpose is not to produce something presentable, but simply to try things, including things that will very likely fail, without any audience ever needing to know how many attempts it actually took before something worked. Let your public work, if you have any, draw only from what survives that private process, the pieces that have already proven themselves, in the safety of complete privacy, before ever being exposed to outside judgment. This isn't about hiding your struggles from people who genuinely care about you, and it isn't about becoming ashamed of failure in some general sense. It's about recognizing, honestly, that the specific, freewheeling, high failure rate experimentation that real growth depends on happens far more easily, far more honestly, and far more often, in a space where no one at all is watching, and protecting that space, deliberately, is one of the most practical things you can do for the actual development of any serious skill or project you care about. In the next chapter, we're going to look at a related but distinct idea, the specific power of working toward a goal that only you know about, and why that particular kind of privacy tends to produce a depth of focus that a publicly known goal almost never can. Chapter 5. The power of a goal only you know. There is a particular kind of focus available to a person pursuing a goal that exists nowhere except inside their own mind. No announcement, no witnesses, no one else even aware that the goal exists at all. And I want to spend this chapter exploring why that specific kind of privacy produces a depth of concentration that a publicly known goal, however well supported, almost never quite manages to match. Think for a moment about the difference between these two situations. In the first, you're working towards something everyone around you already knows about. Your family asks about it at dinner, your friends check in on your progress, your social circle has, in some sense, already absorbed the goal into its shared understanding of who you are and what you're becoming. In the second, you're working towards something that exists entirely inside you, known to no one, invisible to every person in your daily life, a private thread running underneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary-looking existence. The first situation, as we've discussed throughout this journey, carries real hidden costs: premature social reward, subtle pressure to perform a certain visible trajectory, distortion of decisions toward what looks good rather than what the work actually needs. But there's something else happening in the second situation, something we haven't yet fully named, and it deserves its own careful attention. A private goal generates a specific, concentrated kind of internal energy that a shared, known goal tends to dilute, simply by virtue of being shared. Here's the mechanism worth understanding. When a goal is known only to you, every ounce of your attention, your hope, your private ambition around it stays contained, entirely, inside your own mind. There is no outlet for it except the actual work itself. You can't discharge any of that energy through conversation, through updates, through the small, satisfying moments of describing your progress to someone who reacts with interest or admiration. All of it, every bit of drive, every private hope for how this might turn out, has exactly one place left to go: into the thing you're actually building. Let me tell you about a man named Tobias. Tobias had, for years, wanted to run a marathon, but every previous attempt had followed a familiar pattern. He'd announce the goal, train enthusiastically for a few weeks with real public momentum, and then, gradually, watch his motivation dissolve somewhere in the difficult middle months of training, long before race day ever arrived. On what he later described as something close to a whim, Tobias decided to try something different for his next attempt. He told no one, not his closest friends, not his family, not even his partner, who simply noticed, without comment for a while, that Tobias had started disappearing for long runs at strange hours. He trained in complete privacy, telling himself, quietly, that he would only announce the goal if and when he actually crossed the finish line, that the attempt itself would remain his, entirely, until it either succeeded or didn't. What Tobias discovered, over the following months, surprised him. Without an audience checking in, without the periodic satisfying hit of updating people on his progress, something in his relationship to the training itself changed. Every run became, in a strange way, more significant, precisely because it existed nowhere except in his own private experience of it. There was no one to perform consistency for, and, curiously, this made him more consistent, not less, because the entire meaning of the effort now rested on whether he actually finished, rather than on how the effort looked along the way to an audience who might lose interest, or who might, worse, come to associate him with yet another abandoned goal if this attempt also faded, the way his previous public attempts always eventually had. There was something else too that Tobias named later, once he'd finally, privately, successfully finished the race, a specific, quiet intensity to the experience of working towards something that existed only inside him. He described it as feeling almost like a secret he was keeping with himself, a private relationship between him and the goal, undiluted by anyone else's opinions, expectations, or well-meaning check-ins. Every difficult training run belonged entirely to him. Every small improvement was witnessed by no one except the version of himself doing the actual work. And this, counterintuitively, made the whole experience feel more real, more his own, than any of his previous, publicly announced attempts ever had, because nothing about it depended on, or was shaped by, anyone else's awareness of it at all. I want to name something important about why this works, because it connects directly back to ideas we've explored earlier in this journey. A publicly known goal invites, almost automatically, a kind of ongoing negotiation with other people's expectations. Their questions about your timeline, their opinions about your approach, their well-meaning but sometimes distracting suggestions about how you might do things differently. A privately held goal has no such negotiation. It answers to exactly one person, which means every decision about how to pursue it can be made purely on the basis of what actually serves the goal, rather than what will satisfy, reassure, or impress an audience that has, whether they intend it or not, become a quiet stakeholder in how the process unfolds. There's a particular emotional quality worth naming here as well, one Tobias described as genuinely surprising to him. The private pursuit of a goal tends to produce a deeper, steadier relationship with your own resolve, because that resolve is never being borrowed, even slightly, from outside encouragement. When your motivation depends partly on other people's continued interest and support, it becomes vulnerable to their attention wavering, their enthusiasm fading, their checking in less often as time passes, and the goal starts to feel, to them, like old news. When your motivation depends entirely on your own private relationship to the goal, it has nowhere to leak out to, and nothing external it can lose. It either exists inside you, or it doesn't, and the private pursuit of it tends, paradoxically, to strengthen that internal resolve in a way that public accountability, for all its apparent benefits, frequently undermines instead. I want to be careful, once again, not to overstate this into a universal rule that applies identically to every person and every goal. Some people, with some kinds of goals, genuinely do benefit from real, ongoing external accountability, a structured program, a coach, a community built specifically around mutual support and check-ins. The distinction that actually matters here is not simply public versus private in some absolute sense, but rather whether the sharing involved is structured, purposeful, and genuinely useful to the work, like a coach who provides expert feedback at the right moments, versus casual, premature announcement made mostly for the sake of being seen as someone pursuing something impressive, which is the specific pattern this entire journey has been examining. Here's a practice worth carrying forward from Tobias's experience, one you might consider the next time a significant new goal begins forming in you. Before announcing it to anyone, ask yourself honestly what that announcement would actually be for. If the honest answer involves genuine, structured, necessary support, a mentor whose specific expertise you need, a partner whose practical help the goal genuinely requires, sharing may serve the work well. But if the honest answer is closer to wanting the warmth of being seen as someone pursuing something admirable, consider, at least for a defined stretch of time, holding the goal privately instead. Let it exist, for a while, only between you and the work itself. Notice, as Tobias did, what changes in your own relationship to the effort once there's no one else it needs to answer to. In the next chapter, we're going to look at something this private, focused pursuit eventually produces, the particular kind of quiet, internal confidence that comes not from being told you're capable, but from privately proving it to yourself, again and again, when no one else was watching. Chapter 6. The confidence no one can talk you out of. There are two very different kinds of confidence a person can carry through life, and I want to draw a sharp distinction between them in this chapter, because confusing the two is one of the most common and most costly mistakes people make in their relationship with their own capability. The first kind of confidence is borrowed. It's built from the outside in, from praise received, from encouragement offered, from other people's expressed belief in you, absorbed and internalized, until it starts to feel, at least some of the time, like your own genuine sense of what you're capable of. This kind of confidence is not fake, exactly, and it's not without value, but it has a specific, significant vulnerability built into its very foundation. Because it was constructed from external input, it remains, to some degree, dependent on that input continuing. It tends to waver when the praise stops arriving. It tends to crack, sometimes badly, in the face of criticism or doubt from the very people whose earlier encouragement helped build it in the first place. The second kind of confidence is earned, privately, through direct, lived evidence of your own capability. Evidence gathered not from what anyone told you, but from what you actually did, especially in moments when no one else was there to witness it, encourage it, or later remind you of it. This second kind of confidence is sturdier. In a way, the first almost never manages to be, precisely because it doesn't depend on anyone else's continued belief in order to remain intact. It was never borrowed in the first place, so it can't be withdrawn. Let me tell you about a woman named Marguerite. Marguerite had spent much of her early career surrounded by genuinely warm, encouraging colleagues and mentors, people who praised her work consistently, who told her, often and sincerely, how capable and talented she was. And for years, this felt wonderful. It felt like confidence. She moved through her early career with real, visible self-assurance, buoyed almost entirely by the steady stream of external validation surrounding her. The trouble surfaced when Marguerite changed roles, moving into a new, more demanding position where the encouragement she'd grown accustomed to simply wasn't part of the culture. Not because anyone thought poorly of her, but because the new environment was, by nature, quieter, more results-focused, less inclined toward the warm, frequent praise she'd unconsciously come to rely on as the foundation of her own sense of competence. Within a few months, Marguerite noticed something alarming. Without the steady external reassurance she'd always had, her actual confidence in her own abilities had, seemingly overnight, become fragile in a way it had never felt before. She found herself second-guessing decisions she would have made instantly and confidently a year earlier. The competence hadn't disappeared. Her actual skills were, if anything, sharper than ever. But the felt sense of confidence in that competence had been, she came to realize, borrowed the entire time, built on a foundation of external input that had simply been removed, revealing how little of it had ever actually belonged to her. What rebuilt Marguerite's confidence over the following year was not a return to an encouraging environment. It was something more deliberate and considerably more private. She began, quietly, taking on specific challenges within her new role that she told no one about in advance. Difficult problems she worked through entirely on her own, without seeking input, without narrating the struggle to anyone, without any outside witness to either the difficulty or, eventually, the resolution. Each time she solved one of these private challenges, entirely through her own effort, with no external encouragement involved at any stage, something specific and durable was added to her actual, internal sense of her own capability, a piece of evidence that belonged entirely to her, gathered in a context where there had been no audience to perform for, no encouragement to lean on, nothing except her own actual thinking meeting an actual problem and working it through. Over that year, Marguerite accumulated dozens of these small, private proofs, and she noticed, gradually, that her confidence had begun to feel different, steadier, less dependent on the emotional weather of whatever environment she happened to be in, less vulnerable to the absence of praise or the presence of doubt from people around her. This new confidence didn't need to be regularly refreshed by outside encouragement, because it had never been built from outside encouragement in the first place. It had been built, piece by private piece, from direct evidence she'd gathered herself, in moments no one else had witnessed, which meant no one else's opinion, positive or negative, could easily dislodge it. This is worth understanding deeply, because it reframes something many people misunderstand about how genuine, durable confidence actually gets built. Encouragement from others, however well-intentioned and genuinely kind, can never fully substitute for the specific, irreplaceable experience of privately proving something to yourself. This isn't because encouragement is worthless, it isn't, and warm support from people who care about you remains one of life's genuine goods. But encouragement, by its nature, is testimony about your capability offered by someone else, and testimony, however sincere, is simply a weaker form of evidence than direct, personal experience. A private success, solved alone, unwitnessed, unencouraged, entirely self-generated, carries a specific kind of proof that no amount of outside praise, however generously offered, can fully replicate. There's a practical implication worth drawing from this, one that connects directly back to nearly everything we've discussed throughout this journey. If you want to build a genuinely sturdy, durable confidence, the kind that doesn't waver the moment external encouragement goes quiet, you need to deliberately create private tests of your own capability, situations where you solve something real, entirely on your own, with no witness and no expectation of praise waiting on the other side. This doesn't mean rejecting encouragement when it's genuinely offered. or pretending you don't value the support of people who care about you. It means recognizing that encouragement alone, however abundant, cannot build the specific kind of confidence that holds steady when circumstances change, when praise stops arriving, or when you find yourself, as Marguerite eventually did, needing to trust your own judgment in a moment where no one else is available to reassure you that you're capable of trusting it. Here's a practice worth carrying forward from Marguerite's experience. The next time you face a real challenge, before seeking input, advice, or reassurance from anyone else, give yourself a defined period to work through it entirely on your own, not because outside help is bad, but because the private struggle itself, and whatever you manage to work out through it, becomes a specific, durable piece of evidence about your own capability that nothing external can later take away from you. Let some portion of your growth remain entirely unwitnessed. It will feel less immediately rewarding than growth that gets noticed and praised in real time, but it will build something in you that praise, however generously given, was never actually capable of building on its own. In the next chapter, we're going to look at what happens to your relationships themselves, not just your work, once you stop needing to narrate every part of your inner life for an audience, and why some of your deepest connections may actually deepen, not weaken, once you're no longer performing your journey for anyone. Chapter 7. What happens to your relationships when you stop performing? There's an assumption worth questioning directly in this chapter, because I think it quietly shapes how a lot of people approach their closest relationships without ever examining it. The assumption that sharing everything, every goal, every struggle, every small update on your inner life, is what real intimacy requires. That withholding, in any form, must mean distance. That the measure of closeness is how much narration passes between two people about what each of them is currently working on, hoping for, or struggling with. I want to offer you a different way of understanding this because I think the common assumption, followed too literally, actually produces something thinner than the connection it's aiming for, and I think a more selective, more deliberate relationship to what you share can, counterintuitively, deepen your closest bonds rather than weaken them. Here's the distinction worth drawing clearly. There's a kind of sharing that's genuinely relational, offered because you want another person to actually know you, to understand something real and current about your inner experience, in a way that invites them closer and gives them something true to hold. And there's a kind of sharing that's really something else, wearing intimacy's clothing, a narration of your goals and progress, offered less for genuine connection and more for the specific comfort of being witnessed, tracked and validated, regardless of whether the other person genuinely wanted or needed that particular update in that particular moment. The first kind of sharing tends to deepen a relationship because it's actually about the other person, an invitation for them to know you more fully, offered with real attention to whether this is a moment they have the capacity to receive it. The second kind, however well-intentioned, tends to subtly flatten a relationship over time because it turns the other person, without either party quite realizing it, into an audience for your progress rather than a genuine participant in mutual understanding. And an audience, unlike a true confidant, eventually starts to feel, even if they can't name why, a certain fatigue, the quiet weariness of being cast, repeatedly, in the role of witness to someone else's unfolding story, without a comparable depth of exchange flowing back the other way. Let me tell you about two sisters, Odette and Ruth. For years, their relationship had followed a familiar, comfortable pattern. Odette, more naturally expressive, narrated her life to Ruth in constant, detailed updates. Every setback at work, every hope for the future, every small emotional shift, relayed almost in real time. Ruth, quieter by nature, listened, supported, encouraged, the way a good sister does. And for a long time, both of them assumed this was simply what closeness between them looked like. It took a difficult period in Ruth's own life, a real struggle she was going through privately, for something in the relationship to become visible that neither sister had noticed before. Ruth found herself unable or unwilling to bring her own difficulty into a relationship that had, over years, quietly organized itself around Odette's near-constant narration. There didn't seem to be room, exactly, for Ruth's struggle to enter the conversation with the same weight Odette's updates always carried. Not because Odette didn't love her sister, but because the entire rhythm of their communication had been built, gradually, and without either of them designing it deliberately, around one sister's ongoing performance of her inner life and the other sister's steady role as its audience. When this finally surfaced, in an honest and difficult conversation between them, Odette was genuinely surprised and genuinely hurt by what her sister described. She had never intended to make herself the center of their relationship, but looking back honestly, she recognized that her habit of narrating everything, every goal, every hope, every small update, hadn't actually been building the kind of deep mutual knowing she'd always assumed it was. It had been, in a way she hadn't seen clearly until Ruth named it, a quiet, ongoing request for witness and validation, offered so consistently that it had left little space for the relationship's natural give and take to develop in the other direction. What changed for the two sisters over the following months was not that Odette stopped sharing entirely. That would have swung too far in the other direction, replacing one imbalance with another. What changed was that Odette became far more selective and deliberate about what she brought to her sister, and when. She began holding more of her early-stage goals and struggles privately, the way we've discussed throughout this journey, bringing to Ruth only what genuinely needed a second, trusted perspective, or what she genuinely wanted her sister to know as part of really knowing her, rather than everything, narrated constantly, simply because narrating had become a habitual way of processing her own experience out loud. The relationship that emerged from this shift felt, to both sisters, deeper than the one that had come before it, even though it involved considerably less total sharing, because what was shared now carried more weight. It wasn't diluted by constant minor updates, and it left genuine space for Ruth's own inner life to enter the relationship with equal weight, rather than remaining permanently cast in the role of attentive audience to Odette's. This points to something important worth naming clearly. The depth of a relationship is not measured by the total volume of sharing that passes between two people. It's measured by something closer to the quality of attention and mutual exchange present in what is actually shared, and by whether both people have genuine room within the relationship to bring their full selves forward, rather than one person's ongoing narration crowding out space that should belong to both. I want to connect this back to the central theme of this entire journey, because it applies directly here as well. When you hold your goals, your early-stage struggles, your in-progress hopes, privately, not out of secrecy or coldness, but as a deliberate discipline, you free your closest relationships from the subtle burden of constant witness-bearing, and you create room for something that constant narration often crowds out: genuine curiosity about the other person, real space for their inner life to matter as much as yours, and a form of closeness built less on performance and more on presence. There's a specific practice worth carrying forward from Odette and Ruth's experience, one that applies to nearly any close relationship in your life. Before sharing an update about your goals or your progress, pause and ask yourself honestly what you're actually seeking in that moment. If you're seeking genuine connection, wanting this particular person to know something true and current about your inner life, in a way that deepens mutual understanding, sharing likely serves the relationship well. But if you're seeking, mostly, the comfort of being witnessed, tracked, or validated, consider holding it privately instead, at least until it's ready to be shared, not as an update, but as something that genuinely invites the other person closer, with real room left over for whatever they might want to bring back to you in return. This isn't a call toward emotional withholding or coldness with the people you love. It's an invitation toward a more selective, more intentional kind of sharing, one that protects your closest relationships from becoming, without anyone intending it, a permanent audience for your unfolding progress, and makes genuine room, instead, for the deeper, more mutual knowing that constant narration, however well-meaning, often quietly crowds out. In the next chapter, we're going to look at something closely related to this, the specific, quiet strength that comes from carrying a difficulty privately for a while before deciding whether and how to share it, and why this timing matters enormously for how well you're eventually able to move through hard things. Chapter 8. The strength built in private struggle. There is a particular moment, early in almost any real difficulty, when a choice quietly presents itself, often without you fully noticing it's a choice at all. The difficulty has just arrived. The full shape of it isn't yet clear, even to you. And in that early, uncertain window, you decide, usually without deliberate thought, whether to immediately reach outward, sharing the difficulty right away, seeking reassurance, seeking input, seeking the comfort of not carrying it alone, or whether to sit with it privately first, for some period of time, before deciding how and with whom to share it. I want to make the case, in this chapter, for the value of that private window, not as a permanent state, and not as an argument against ever seeking support, but as a genuinely important stage that too many people skip past entirely, reaching immediately for outside reassurance before they've given themselves any real chance to sit with the difficulty on their own terms first. Here's why this matters. When you share a difficulty immediately, in its earliest, least understood form, you are, in a real sense, outsourcing some of the initial processing of that difficulty to whoever you share it with. Their reaction, their concern, their advice, their interpretation of what's happening and what it means, begins shaping your own understanding of the situation before you've had the chance to develop your own clear, independent read on it. This isn't necessarily harmful in every case, but it does mean something important. Your relationship to the difficulty becomes, from very early on, entangled with someone else's reaction to it, rather than remaining, for at least a little while, entirely your own. Let me tell you about a man named Fenwick. Fenwick received, in his early 40s, some concerning news about his health. Nothing immediately dire, but genuinely serious enough to require real attention and real decisions about how to proceed. His first instinct, understandable and completely human, was to call his closest friends immediately, to share what he was facing, to seek their comfort and their reactions as a way of not having to sit alone with something frightening. But something made him pause before making those calls, a quiet intuition that he wasn't yet ready to metabolize other people's reactions on top of his own still-forming understanding of what he was actually dealing with. He decided, instead, to give himself a defined period, a few days, before telling anyone at all, using that time simply to sit with the news himself, to research what he could, to notice his own actual feelings about it without yet having them shaped, even gently, by the concern and reactions of people who loved him. Those few private days, Fenwick said later, turned out to matter enormously, in a way he hadn't anticipated. Alone with the difficulty, without anyone else's fear or concern layered on top of his own, he found he was able to think about the situation with a clarity that surprised him, assessing what he actually knew, what he didn't yet know, what his real next steps needed to be, without simultaneously managing anyone else's emotional reaction to the news at the same time. By the time he did eventually share what he was facing with his closest friends, several days later, he brought them something different than he would have brought them on the first day, not raw, unprocessed fear looking for immediate comfort, but a clearer, more grounded account of what was actually happening and what kind of support would genuinely help, which meant his friends, in turn, were able to show up for him more usefully, responding to his actual, considered needs, rather than to his rawest, least examined initial fear. This is worth understanding as a genuine skill, distinct from either total secrecy or immediate, reflexive sharing, the deliberate practice of sitting with a difficulty privately for a defined period, before deciding how and with whom to share it. This isn't about hiding pain from people who love you, and it isn't about handling everything alone as some kind of misguided badge of strength. It's about giving yourself the chance to develop your own clear-eyed relationship to a difficulty before other people's reactions, however loving, begin shaping that relationship for you, so that when you do reach outward, which remains a genuinely important and healthy thing to do, you're doing so from a place of somewhat greater clarity, rather than from the very first, most overwhelmed moment of encountering the difficulty at all. There's a particular kind of strength that gets built during this private window, one worth naming directly: the quiet, internal confidence that comes from discovering, through direct experience, that you are capable of sitting with something hard without immediately needing someone else to help carry it. This doesn't mean you should carry every hard thing alone forever. Genuine support remains essential, and there's no virtue in unnecessary isolation during real difficulty. But there is real value. underappreciated in a culture that often treats immediate sharing as the only healthy response to hardship. In discovering that you can hold something difficult, even briefly, on your own, because that discovery becomes, itself, a piece of durable evidence about your own resilience, gathered the same private way the confidence in Chapter 6 was gathered, through direct proof rather than borrowed reassurance. I want to be genuinely careful here, because this is a place where the message could easily be misapplied in a way that causes real harm, and I don't want that to happen. If you are in a moment of acute crisis, if you are in danger, if the difficulty you're facing involves thoughts of harming yourself, if you are overwhelmed in a way that feels genuinely unsafe to sit with alone, please do not wait, and please do not treat this chapter as advice to isolate yourself in that kind of moment. Reach out immediately, to someone you trust, or to a crisis service, without hesitation. Everything in this chapter is about ordinary, non-crisis difficulty, a hard diagnosis still being understood, a professional setback, a painful but non-emergency situation, where a brief period of private processing can genuinely help you show up more clearly for the support you'll eventually seek. It is never about facing genuine danger or crisis alone. With that important distinction held clearly in mind, here's a practice worth carrying forward from Fenwick's experience. The next time real difficulty arrives, the ordinary, non-crisis kind that makes up most of a life's hard moments, consider giving yourself a brief, defined period of private processing before reaching outward, not indefinitely, and not as a way of avoiding support altogether, but as a genuine stage, honored deliberately, before the input and reactions of others begin shaping your own still-forming understanding of what you're facing. Notice, as Fenwick did, what becomes available to you in that private window. A clarity, a groundedness, a sense of your own capacity to sit with difficulty, that immediate sharing, however well-intentioned, often doesn't leave room for. In the next chapter, we're going to look at how all of this, protected focus, private struggle, quiet confidence, selective sharing, actually shapes the specific quality of the work you eventually produce, and why the deepest, most original contributions tend to emerge from exactly this kind of guarded, unhurried process. Chapter 9, where original work actually comes from. There is a quiet, often overlooked truth about where genuinely original work comes from, and I want to bring it into full view in this chapter, because it explains something that puzzles a lot of people who work hard, care deeply, and still find their output feeling, somehow, less distinctive than they'd hoped it would be. Originality, real originality, not novelty for its own sake, but work that carries something genuinely unmistakable, something that couldn't have come from anyone else, tends to emerge from a very specific condition, sustained time spent thinking and working without the constant, subtle pressure of comparison. And comparison, it turns out, is one of the most immediate and unavoidable side effects of sharing your process publicly, even with the kindest, most well-meaning audience imaginable. Here's why this matters so deeply. The moment you know other people are watching your progress, some part of your mind, almost automatically, begins measuring your work against a mental landscape of everyone else's work in the same space. What's already been done, what's currently trending, what tends to get a strong reaction, what feels safely similar enough to succeed, without feeling so unfamiliar that it risks confusing or alienating an audience. This comparison happens quietly, often without conscious awareness, but its effect on the actual shape of the work is significant. It pulls ideas toward the recognizable middle, because the recognizable middle is, almost by definition, what an audience already knows how to respond to. Genuinely original ideas, by contrast, often don't resemble anything an audience has seen before, which means they carry real risk of confusing, underwhelming, or simply failing to land, at least initially, with people who don't yet have a category for what they're looking at. Let me tell you about a man named Emeka. Emeka was a musician who had spent years releasing music publicly, gathering feedback constantly, adjusting his sound in response to what seemed to resonate most with his growing audience. His music was, by most measures, good, technically accomplished, well-received, steadily building a following. And yet Emeka carried a private, nagging sense that something was missing from his work, a distinctiveness he could sense in the artists he admired most, but couldn't quite locate in his own output, no matter how much he refined it. The shift came during a period when Emeka, for reasons unrelated to any deliberate strategy, simply stopped sharing new work for an extended stretch. A personal circumstance had pulled his attention elsewhere, and by the time he returned to music, months had passed without him releasing or discussing anything publicly. During that quiet stretch, almost as an experiment, he began writing music with no plan to share it at all. No audience in mind, no sense of what anyone else might think, simply following whatever felt genuinely interesting to him in the moment, regardless of how strange or unfamiliar it seemed. What emerged from that period, when Emeka finally listened back to it, was unlike anything he'd made before. Stranger in places, less immediately accessible, but also, unmistakably, more distinctly his, carrying a specific quality he recognized, with something like surprise, as the exact thing he'd always sensed missing from his more public, more audience-shaped work. Freed from the constant, quiet comparison that public sharing had trained into his process, his instincts had wandered somewhere his more calibrated, audience-aware instincts had never quite let him go before. This points to something important about how genuine originality actually develops, and it's worth understanding clearly. Original work rarely emerges from trying to be original, as a deliberate goal pursued in front of an audience. It tends to emerge, instead, as a byproduct of simply following your own actual interest and curiosity, undistorted by the quiet, constant pull of comparison that an audience, even an admiring one, inevitably introduces. The moment you're aware of being watched, some part of your creative or intellectual instinct starts calibrating toward what will land well with that audience. And calibration toward an existing audience, by its very nature, pulls away from the genuinely unfamiliar territory where the most original contributions tend to live. I want to name a related idea here, because it deepens this point considerably. Comparison doesn't just pull your work toward the recognizable middle, it also, subtly, narrows what you allow yourself to even consider as a legitimate direction to explore. When you're aware of an audience, certain ideas get quietly filtered out before you even fully develop them. Not because you've consciously rejected them, but because some part of you has already, automatically, assessed them as too strange, too risky, too far from what the audience has shown it responds to, and simply stopped pursuing them before they had a real chance to develop into something worth evaluating on their own terms. In complete privacy, without that filter running, ideas get to survive longer, develop further, before any judgment, yours or anyone else's, gets applied to them. Emeka, after that private period, didn't abandon public sharing altogether, but he changed, permanently, the order of his process. He began doing all of his earliest, most exploratory work in complete privacy, following whatever genuinely interested him without any thought of audience at all. And only later, once a piece had developed real internal coherence and he understood clearly what it actually was, did he bring it out into public view. The distinctiveness that had been missing from his earlier, more continuously public process returned, consistently, once the earliest stage of the work had been protected from comparison long enough to develop its own genuine shape. There's a broader principle worth carrying forward here, one that applies well beyond creative work in the narrow sense. The most original contributions in almost any field, business, science, art, even simply how a person chooses to live their own life, tend to emerge from periods of genuine, uncompared thinking, protected long enough for an idea to develop its own internal logic before being measured against everyone else's version of similar work. This is not an argument for permanent isolation from other people's work and ideas, which remains, in the right measure, genuinely valuable input. It's an argument for sequencing, for protecting the earliest, most fragile stage of your own thinking from premature comparison, so that whatever is genuinely yours in it has a real chance to develop before it's evaluated against, or unconsciously shaped by, everyone else's existing version of the same territory. Here's a practice worth carrying forward from Emeka's experience. The next time you begin genuinely original work, a new idea, a new project, a new direction you're excited about, resist the urge to immediately research everyone else who's already working in a similar space. and resist sharing the earliest version of your thinking with anyone at all. Give yourself, instead, a defined period of private, uncompared development, following your own actual curiosity wherever it genuinely wants to go, before you introduce any outside comparison into the process at all. You may find, as Emeka did, that what emerges from that protected period carries a distinctiveness that a more continuously compared process would have quietly filtered out before it ever had the chance to fully form. In the next chapter, we're going to look at what all of this requires of you emotionally, specifically, how to tolerate the discomfort of not being recognized for work that's genuinely in progress, and why learning to sit with that discomfort might be one of the most valuable skills this entire journey can offer you. Chapter 10. Learning to sit with not being recognized yet. There is a particular discomfort that comes with everything we've discussed throughout this journey, and I want to name it directly, because pretending it doesn't exist would make this entire path feel more available and more painless than it honestly is. Working quietly, privately, without announcement or recognition, means tolerating something genuinely difficult, the absence, for a real stretch of time, of the very acknowledgement that human beings are, at a deep and completely understandable level, wired to want. This isn't a small thing to ask of yourself, and I don't want to minimize it. We discussed, back in Chapter 5, the ancient wiring that connects belonging and recognition to a felt sense of safety. Choosing to work without recognition, deliberately, for an extended period, means choosing to sit inside a kind of quiet that can feel, especially in its early stages, uncomfortably close to invisibility, a discomfort worth naming honestly, because learning to tolerate it, rather than being ruled by it, is genuinely one of the harder and more valuable skills this entire path requires. Let me tell you about a woman named Perpetua. Perpetua had committed herself, after learning much of what we've discussed in this journey, to building a significant project entirely in private, telling almost no one, protecting the early, fragile stages of the work from any outside observation at all. For the first several months, this felt, largely, like a relief. Freedom from the subtle distortions of audience we've discussed throughout this journey. Freedom to experiment, freedom to fail unseen. But somewhere around the 4th or 5th month, a different feeling began to surface, one Perpetua hadn't fully anticipated. Watching people around her share their own progress, their own milestones, their own moments of public recognition, she began to feel a genuine, sharp discomfort. Not doubt about her project itself, but something closer to a quiet loneliness, a felt absence of the acknowledgement that everyone around her seemed to be receiving regularly for their own, far more visible efforts. She found herself, on particularly hard days, questioning whether the entire private approach had been a mistake, whether she was simply depriving herself of something genuinely valuable, something everyone else seemed to have easy access to, for the sake of a discipline that suddenly felt more like isolation than protection. This discomfort, Perpetua came to understand, deserved to be taken seriously rather than dismissed or pushed through with sheer willpower, but it also deserved to be examined carefully rather than simply obeyed as though it were straightforward, reliable evidence that something had gone wrong. What she discovered, sitting with the discomfort honestly rather than either suppressing it or immediately abandoning her private approach because of it, was something worth naming clearly. The discomfort of not being recognized is real, and it will not disappear simply because you understand, intellectually, all the reasons private work tends to be stronger. Understanding the reasoning behind a discipline, as we discussed back in Chapter 11 of the previous journey we walked through together, does not automatically make the discipline feel easy in the moment. It simply gives you a reason to keep choosing it, even while the discomfort remains genuinely present. Perpetua developed, over the following months, a specific internal practice for sitting with this discomfort without letting it derail her private process. When the ache of not being recognized arose, and it continued to arise periodically throughout the project, never fully disappearing, she began meeting it with a direct, honest acknowledgement rather than either suppression or immediate reactive sharing. She would name it to herself plainly. This is the discomfort of choosing depth over immediate recognition. It's real and it's hard, and I'm choosing it anyway because I understand what it's protecting. This small act of naming, rather than either fighting the feeling or acting immediately on its urgent pull toward sharing, gave her something to do with the discomfort besides simply being controlled by it. There's an important distinction worth drawing here, one that matters enormously for how sustainable this entire approach can actually be over time. The goal is not to eliminate the desire for recognition, which would be neither possible nor, honestly, entirely desirable. A total absence of that desire would mean losing something genuinely human and valuable about wanting your effort to eventually be seen and understood by others. The goal, instead, is to develop the capacity to hold that desire without letting it dictate premature action, to feel the pull toward sharing before the work is ready, and to choose, deliberately, not to act on that pull immediately, the same way you might feel hungry at an inconvenient moment, and choose, consciously, to wait for a better time to eat, rather than treating the hunger as an emergency requiring instant response. Perpetua's project, when it finally emerged from its long private development, arrived considerably stronger for having been protected the entire way through. Genuinely original, genuinely coherent, carrying exactly the kind of distinctive depth we discussed in the previous chapter. But she was honest afterward that the process of getting there had not been free of real difficulty, and she was careful not to describe it, looking back, as easier than it had actually been. The private path, she said, had been worth it. It had also been genuinely hard, in a specific way that deserved acknowledgement rather than being glossed over in the retelling. I want to offer you something important here, because I think it matters for how you carry this entire journey forward into your own life. Choosing to work quietly, privately, without premature recognition, is not a path that eliminates discomfort. It's a path that trades one kind of discomfort, the thinner, more diluted motivation and distorted focus that come from constant sharing, which we explored throughout the earlier chapters of this journey, for a different kind of discomfort, the ache of temporary invisibility, which is real and which deserves to be met honestly rather than denied. Here's a practice worth carrying forward from Perpetua's experience, one you can use whenever this particular discomfort arises during your own private work, rather than immediately either suppressing the feeling or acting on its pull toward premature sharing. Pause and name it clearly, the way she learned to. Acknowledge, honestly, that the desire for recognition is real and completely human. Remind yourself, clearly, what your privacy is actually protecting, and why you chose this path in the first place. And then, having acknowledged the discomfort rather than fighting it, make a deliberate choice about whether this is genuinely the right moment to share, or whether the discomfort, however real, is simply the ordinary cost of a discipline you still believe, on reflection, is worth continuing to pay. In the next chapter, we're going to look at how to recognize the moment when private work is actually, finally ready to be shared, because privacy, throughout this entire journey, has never been the permanent goal. It's been the protection a certain stage of the work genuinely needs before it's ready for something else entirely. Chapter 11. Knowing when silence has done its job. There is a question worth asking clearly at this point in the journey, because everything we've discussed so far could, if left unbalanced, tip into something unhealthy. How do you know when the silence has done what it was meant to do, when the work or the goal or the private struggle is finally ready to move from protected privacy into the open, shared part of your life? This matters enormously, because privacy, throughout this entire journey, was never meant to be the permanent destination. It was meant to be a stage, a genuinely important, often underestimated stage, but a stage nonetheless, with a beginning and, eventually, a natural end. Silence that never ends, work that's never shared, goals that remain forever locked away from any outside contact at all. This isn't protection anymore. It's avoidance wearing protection's clothing, and it deserves to be named honestly as something different from everything we've discussed so far. Let's look at what actually distinguishes healthy, purposeful privacy from privacy that has curdled into avoidance, because the difference matters enormously and isn't always obvious from the inside. Purposeful privacy has a reason, protecting an idea's early, fragile development, keeping motivation undiluted by premature recognition. allowing genuine experimentation without the distorting pressure of an audience. And because it has a reason, it also, naturally, has an end point, a point at which the reason no longer applies, because the idea has developed real coherence, because the goal has been substantially achieved, because the private struggle has resolved into something worth sharing. Avoidance dressed as privacy, by contrast, has no genuine endpoint at all. It simply continues, indefinitely, often because the fear underneath it, of judgment, of failure witnessed, of vulnerability, of finally finding out whether the work is actually good, never gets addressed, and the privacy becomes a permanent way of postponing that reckoning, rather than a genuine, temporary stage in a real process. Let me tell you about a man named Bertrand. Bertrand had, for years, been working privately on a significant creative project, having genuinely internalized much of what this journey has discussed about the value of protected, unhurried, uncompared development. And for a real stretch of time, this served him well. The early work benefited enormously from the privacy, developing a depth and originality that Bertrand recognized clearly and was genuinely proud of. But somewhere along the way, something shifted, subtly, without Bertrand fully noticing the change. The project, by any honest measure, reached a point of real completion, not perfect, because nothing ever fully is, but genuinely ready, in the way that matters, to be shared and encountered by other people. And yet Bertrand didn't share it. Months passed, then longer. He found himself, each time the question of sharing arose, reaching for a reason to wait a little longer, one more revision, one more round of private refinement, one more reason the timing wasn't quite right yet. It took a direct, honest conversation with someone who knew him well to name what was actually happening. His privacy, which had genuinely served the work in its earlier stages, had quietly transformed into something else, a way of avoiding the specific, real vulnerability of finally letting the work meet the world and find out, honestly, how it would be received. As long as the project remained private, it existed in a protected state, where it could be, in Bertrand's own mind, potentially brilliant, an unfalsified possibility rather than a tested, judged reality. Sharing it risked collapsing that comfortable possibility into something more definite, and some part of Bertrand, understandably afraid of that collapse, had quietly extended the not ready yet stage far beyond the point where it genuinely applied. This is worth naming honestly, because it's one of the most common ways healthy privacy quietly curdles into something that no longer serves the person practicing it. Privacy, at its best, protects a work's development. But privacy can also, if unexamined, become a way of protecting yourself from ever finding out whether the work, or you, measure up to the standard you're secretly afraid of falling short of. And this second kind of privacy, however similar it looks from the outside to the healthy kind we've discussed throughout this journey, deserves to be recognized clearly for what it actually is, because it forecloses the entire purpose privacy was ever supposed to serve in the first place. So how do you actually tell the difference, in your own life, between privacy that's still doing its genuine job and privacy that has quietly become avoidance? There are a few honest questions worth asking yourself, periodically, about any significant private work or goal. Has the work reached a point of real, substantive coherence, not perfection, which never arrives, but a genuine, developed shape that could meaningfully be encountered by someone else? If the honest answer is yes, and you're still finding reasons to delay, it's worth asking a second, harder question. What, specifically, am I afraid would happen if I shared this now? If the answer involves something concrete and addressable, a specific piece of feedback you genuinely need first, a particular detail still genuinely unresolved, that's likely still healthy, purposeful privacy. But if the answer is vaguer, more diffuse, a general fear of judgment, a reluctance to find out how the work will actually be received, that vagueness is often, itself, a sign that the privacy has outlived its original purpose and quietly become something closer to hiding. Bertrand, once he could see this pattern clearly in his own life, made a deliberate decision to share the project, uncomfortable as it felt, within a specific, defined time frame, giving himself no further room to extend the not quite ready stage indefinitely. The experience of finally sharing it was, he admitted honestly, genuinely difficult in the way vulnerability always is. But it was also, he found, considerably less catastrophic than the years of quiet avoidance had led him to fear. The project was received well, not universally, not without some criticism, because no real work ever is, but well enough, and substantively enough, that the entire long period of additional, unnecessary private delay came to feel, in retrospect, less like continued protection and more like simple, understandable fear that had needed to be named and moved through, rather than indulged indefinitely. I want to offer a practical structure here because this distinction matters too much to leave entirely to intuition, which, as Bertrand's story shows, can be quietly self-deceiving when fear is involved. Before beginning any significant piece of private work, it's worth setting, in advance, some honest sense, even a rough one, of what ready to share will actually look like, defined in terms of the work's own qualities, rather than in terms of a feeling of confidence that may never fully arrive. This gives you something concrete to check the work against later, rather than relying entirely on an in-the-moment feeling of readiness that fear, if left unexamined, can indefinitely postpone. Here's what I want you to carry forward from this chapter, because it matters for how you hold everything else this journey has offered. Silence, throughout this entire path, has always been in service of the work, and of you, never an end in itself. The goal was never to become a permanently private person, disconnected from sharing, from feedback, from the genuine, eventual satisfaction of letting real work meet the world and be encountered by other people. The goal was to protect the parts of the process that genuinely needed protecting, for exactly as long as they needed it, and no longer, trusting yourself, honestly and periodically, to recognize the difference between privacy still doing its job and privacy that has quietly become a way of avoiding the very vulnerability the work was always, eventually, going to require. In the next chapter, we're going to look at what it actually looks like to share work, finally, after a period of protected privacy, and the specific, healthier relationship to other people's reactions that this entire process makes possible. Chapter 12. Sharing from strength instead of need. There is a specific, important difference between sharing your work or your progress from a place of need and sharing it from a place of genuine strength, and everything we've discussed throughout this journey has, in a real sense, been building toward exactly this distinction, because it changes almost everything about how sharing actually feels and how well it actually serves you once the moment finally arrives. Sharing from need looks like this. The work isn't fully formed yet, but some part of you shares it anyway, hoping the reaction you receive will provide something you don't yet have on your own: confidence, validation, a sense that the effort has been worthwhile, reassurance that you're on the right track. In this mode, other people's reactions carry enormous weight because they're being asked to supply something genuinely missing. A positive reaction feels like relief. A lukewarm or critical one feels devastating, disproportionately so, because it isn't simply information about the work. It's a referendum on whether the entire private effort was worth anything at all. Sharing from strength looks different, and it's only really available after a period of the kind of protected, private development we've discussed throughout this journey. The work has already found its own shape, in private, away from outside reaction. Your confidence in it, if any exists, was built the way we discussed in Chapter 6, through direct, private evidence, not through anticipation of applause. When you finally share work built this way, you're not asking the reaction to supply something missing. You already have what you needed. The sharing becomes something closer to an offering than a request, and other people's reactions, whatever they turn out to be, become genuinely useful information rather than an emotionally loaded verdict on your own worth. Let me tell you about a woman named Ottiline, whose experience captures this distinction with real clarity. Ottiline had spent, by this point in her life, real time deliberately practicing much of what this journey has discussed: private development, protected experimentation, quiet confidence built through direct, unwitnessed proof of her own capability. When she finally shared a significant piece of work that had gone through this entire private process, she noticed something genuinely different about her own experience of sharing it. Compared to earlier projects she'd shared far more prematurely, straight out of an anxious need for immediate reassurance. This time, waiting for reactions didn't carry the same charged, anxious quality it once had. She found herself genuinely curious about how the work would land, rather than desperately hoping for a particular response to validate the effort. When some reactions came back mixed, a piece of criticism here, an indifferent response there, she noticed, with something like surprise, that these reactions didn't destabilize her the way similar feedback had destabilized her in the past. She could actually consider the criticism honestly, weighing whether it pointed to something genuinely worth addressing, rather than experiencing it as an attack on her fundamental worth that needed to be defended against, or that collapsed her confidence entirely. This is the specific gift that the entire process we've walked through in this journey eventually makes available. Once your confidence and your sense of the work's value have already been established privately through your own direct experience of building it, other people's reactions can finally return to being what they were always supposed to be: useful, sometimes valuable, sometimes simply beside the point, but never again the sole source of whether you feel the effort was worthwhile in the first place. This is an enormous shift, and it's worth understanding clearly why it matters so much. Work shared from need makes you fundamentally dependent on external reaction for your own sense of whether the effort succeeded. Work shared from strength lets external reaction inform and improve the work, without ever needing to determine your fundamental sense of its worth, or yours. There's something important worth naming about what this shift actually enables, practically, in how you engage with feedback. Once you're sharing from this place of strength rather than need, you become able to genuinely hear criticism, including fair and useful criticism, without it threatening your entire sense of the project's value. This might seem like a small difference, but it has enormous practical consequences. A person sharing from need often becomes, without meaning to, either defensive toward criticism because it feels like an attack on something fragile, or excessively deflated by it because the criticism arrives as confirmation of an anxiety that was already present before the feedback ever came in. A person sharing from strength can actually use criticism the way it's meant to be used, as information weighed honestly against their own developed understanding of the work, sometimes incorporated, sometimes respectfully set aside, but never treated as a verdict on their fundamental worth. I want to connect this back to something we discussed earlier in this journey, because it clarifies why the entire private process matters so much, ultimately, for this final stage. Everything we've walked through, the protection of early ideas, the freedom to fail unseen, the private goals held close, the quiet confidence built through unwitnessed proof, was never really about avoiding other people, or avoiding eventual sharing, or building some permanently guarded, isolated way of moving through the world. It was about arriving at the moment of sharing from an entirely different position than most people ever get to occupy, not needing the reaction to tell you whether the effort mattered, because you already know, from direct private experience, that it did. Otterline described this shift, looking back on it, as one of the most significant changes in how she related to her own work across her entire life. Sharing no longer felt like handing over a piece of herself for judgment, hoping desperately for a favorable verdict. It felt, instead, like offering something she'd already built real confidence in, genuinely curious to see how it would meet the world, but no longer dependent on that meeting to determine whether the work, or she herself, had value. Here's what I want you to carry forward from this chapter, and from everything this journey has walked through together up to this point. The entire discipline of protected privacy we've explored isn't ultimately about staying hidden. It's about arriving, eventually, at the moment of sharing already whole, already carrying your own quiet, earned confidence in the work, built through private, unwitnessed proof, rather than borrowed from anticipated applause. When you finally do share, from that place, the sharing itself becomes something genuinely different than it was before you began this journey. Not a request for something you're missing, but an offering from a place where nothing essential was ever missing in the first place. In the final chapters ahead, we're going to bring together everything we've discussed throughout this entire journey and look at what it means to carry this discipline forward, not as a rigid rule applied to every situation, but as a quiet, wise instinct for knowing when to protect your process in silence, and when the moment has genuinely arrived, to let your work, finally, speak for itself. Chapter 13. Not a rule, but a discernment. If you've walked through this entire journey with me, chapter by chapter, there's a risk worth naming directly before we go any further. The risk of taking everything we've discussed and turning it into a rigid rule, applied mechanically to every situation in your life, regardless of context. Never tell anyone anything until it's finished. Always protect every goal in total silence. Sharing early is always weakness. Sharing late is always strength. I want to be honest with you here, because rigid rules, however well-intentioned, almost always end up serving you worse than genuine discernment would. And everything we've explored in this journey was always meant to sharpen your judgment, not replace it with a new, equally unthinking formula. Let's look honestly at where a rigid version of this philosophy would actually fail you, because understanding its limits matters just as much as understanding its value. There are goals that genuinely benefit from early, structured accountability, certain kinds of habit change, for instance, where research consistently shows that visible commitment to a specific, engaged community can meaningfully improve follow-through, particularly for goals with clear, trackable metrics and low social stakes, if you fall short. There are difficulties that genuinely require immediate outside support rather than a period of private processing, situations involving real danger, real crisis, real need for expert intervention that no amount of private reflection could adequately address alone. There are relationships built specifically around mutual, ongoing transparency, where withholding routine updates, rather than protecting anything valuable, would actually damage the trust and closeness the relationship depends on. A rigid application of everything we've discussed would flatten all of these important distinctions into a single, unthinking rule. And a single, unthinking rule, however useful as a general corrective, was never the actual destination of this journey. Let me tell you about a woman named Seraphine, whose experience illustrates this well. Seraphine had, after encountering ideas very similar to what we've explored throughout this journey, become genuinely committed to the discipline of private, protected work. And for a real stretch of her life, this served her extraordinarily well. A significant career transition, developed almost entirely in private, benefited enormously from exactly the kind of protection we've discussed. But Seraphine, in her enthusiasm for this newly discovered discipline, began applying it somewhat indiscriminately, even to situations where it didn't genuinely fit. She began, for instance, withholding routine, ordinary updates from her closest partner. Not significant, early-stage creative work requiring genuine protection, but simple, everyday information about her day, her feelings, her ordinary experiences, under the mistaken impression that this too fell under the general banner of protecting her privacy and her focus. Her partner, understandably, began to feel a growing distance in the relationship, confused by a shift that seemed to have no clear purpose beyond a general, newly adopted philosophy of withholding. It took an honest conversation and some real reflection for Seraphine to recognize what had happened. She had taken a genuinely useful discernment, protect the early, fragile stages of ambitious, identity-relevant goals from premature reaction, and mistakenly generalized it into something much broader and considerably less useful, a vague, indiscriminate instinct toward withholding, applied even in contexts like her closest, most trusted relationship, where openness had always been, and remained, exactly what the relationship actually needed in order to thrive. This is worth understanding clearly, because it corrects something important that could otherwise undermine everything valuable in this journey. The actual skill being built throughout these chapters was never simply share less. It was always, more precisely, share more deliberately, with real awareness of what a specific goal, a specific relationship, or a specific moment genuinely requires, rather than defaulting automatically to either constant openness or reflexive privacy, regardless of context. Once Seraphine recognized this, she recalibrated, not by abandoning the discipline that had served her career transition so well, but by applying it with far more precision. Her significant, identity-relevant goals, the kind still developing, still fragile, still vulnerable to the distortions we've discussed throughout this journey, remained protected, held privately, until they'd found their own genuine shape. but her ordinary daily life with her partner returned to its previous, natural openness, because that openness had never been the problem this discipline was ever meant to solve. There's a useful question worth carrying forward here, one that can guide this kind of discernment in almost any situation where you're deciding how much to share and with whom. Is this specific situation one where sharing would genuinely serve connection, accountability, or necessary support? Or is it one where sharing would primarily serve a need for premature recognition at the cost of the work's own development? This question, asked honestly and specifically, rather than answered by a blanket rule applied automatically, tends to produce far better judgment than either extreme: constant, undifferentiated openness on one side, or rigid, indiscriminate privacy on the other. I want to offer a few practical markers worth considering, because they can help sharpen this discernment in real situations, rather than leaving it entirely abstract. Goals and projects that are still forming, still identity relevant, still vulnerable to the specific distortions of premature social reward we discussed in Chapter 1, these tend to benefit from real protection, at least in their early stages. Ordinary daily experience, shared with people you're already deeply close to, as part of the natural, mutual texture of an established relationship. This tends to belong to openness, not privacy, because withholding it serves no protective purpose and can genuinely damage trust, the way it briefly did in Seraphine's relationship. Situations involving real, immediate need, crisis, danger, genuine requirement for expert help, call clearly for immediate outreach, never for private processing, regardless of anything else this journey has discussed. And structured, deliberately chosen accountability, a coach, a specific support group, a trusted mentor whose expertise the goal genuinely requires, represents a different category entirely from casual, premature announcement, and can be genuinely valuable, even for significant, identity-relevant goals, precisely because it's chosen deliberately rather than defaulted into out of habit or unexamined impulse. Here's what I want you to carry forward from this chapter, because I think it protects everything valuable in the rest of this journey, from curdling into something too rigid to actually serve you well. The discipline we've explored throughout these chapters is a tool for discernment, not a replacement for it. It asks you to notice, honestly and specifically, in each new situation, what kind of sharing would genuinely serve the goal, the relationship, or the moment in front of you, rather than defaulting, unthinkingly, to either extreme. This takes more ongoing attention than a simple fixed rule would require, but it produces something far more valuable than any rule could: a genuine, adaptable wisdom about when silence protects and when it simply isolates. In the next chapter, we're going to look at how this entire way of working and living, held with this kind of genuine discernment, actually changes the felt texture of an ordinary life over time, not in dramatic, visible ways, but in something quieter and ultimately more durable. Chapter 14. The quiet life this actually builds. If you've walked with me through everything this journey has covered, I want to take a moment now, before we reach the close, to describe honestly what kind of life this discipline actually tends to build over time. Not in an idealized, dramatic sense, but in the ordinary, lived texture of days and years, because I think it's easy, at this point, to imagine something more austere or more solitary than what this path actually produces. The life built by this discipline is not, contrary to what you might expect, a quiet, withdrawn, isolated one. It's not a life spent avoiding people, avoiding connection, avoiding the genuine warmth of being known and celebrated by others. What it actually produces, over time, is something more specific and, I think, considerably more valuable. A life in which your relationship to your own work and your own goals no longer depends on constant external input, which frees you to engage with other people from a place of genuine choice, rather than quiet, unexamined need. Think about how differently a person moves through their relationships and their work once they're no longer, even unconsciously, scanning for validation at every turn. Conversations become genuinely more present because you're not simultaneously managing an internal need for the other person to notice and affirm your progress. Feedback becomes genuinely more useful because you're able to actually hear it, weigh it honestly, rather than either defending against it or being destabilized by it. Setbacks become more survivable because your sense of your own worth was never fully outsourced to how the work happened to be received on any given day. And connection, paradoxically, tends to deepen because the people around you are no longer being cast, without their consent, in the role of your audience. They're simply present with you as themselves, in a relationship built on mutual presence rather than one person's ongoing need for witness. Let me tell you, one final time in this journey, about a man named Aurelio, whose life I think captures something important about what this discipline actually builds when it's practiced, patiently, over years rather than months. Aurelio had spent much of his younger adulthood caught in exactly the patterns this journey has examined, announcing goals too early, working in a way subtly shaped by anticipated reaction, depending, more than he'd ever fully realized, on external validation for his own sense of whether his life and his work were actually going well. Over the following decade, gradually, Aurelio built something different, not through a single dramatic transformation, but through the same kind of patient, repeated practice we discussed near the end of the previous journey we walked through together, protecting his early ideas, building private confidence through unwitnessed proof, learning to sit with the discomfort of not being immediately recognized, sharing, eventually, from strength rather than need, holding all of it with genuine discernment rather than rigid rule, adjusting to what each specific situation actually called for. What Aurelio described, looking back on that decade, was not a life that had become smaller, or more isolated, or more guarded in any way that felt like loss. It was a life that had become, in his own words, quieter, in exactly the places that needed quiet, and considerably richer, in exactly the places that most benefited from genuine, undistracted attention. His work, developed with real protection in its early stages, had become more distinctly his own, carrying a depth he hadn't been capable of producing during his earlier, more constantly public years. His relationships, freed from the subtle burden of constant narration and witness-seeking, had become more genuinely mutual, with real room for other people's inner lives to matter as much as his own. And his own sense of himself, his confidence, his resilience, his basic relationship to his own capability, had become sturdier, built from years of accumulated private evidence rather than borrowed, however warmly, from other people's ongoing reassurance. This is, I think, the quiet, undramatic gift waiting on the other side of everything we've discussed throughout this journey. Not a life without connection, without sharing, without the genuine, eventual satisfaction of letting real work meet the world and be celebrated when it's actually ready. But a life in which none of that becomes the foundation your own sense of worth depends on. A life built instead from the inside out, where recognition, when it eventually comes, arrives as a genuine bonus rather than as the thing you were quietly starving for the whole time. I want to name something important as we near the end of this journey, because I think it matters for how you carry all of this forward. This discipline, practiced well, doesn't make you someone who no longer cares what other people think, or someone who has somehow transcended the ordinary human desire for connection and recognition. It makes you someone whose caring about those things has become proportionate, rather than consuming, someone who can genuinely enjoy being seen and celebrated when the moment for that arrives, precisely because your entire sense of worth was never fully dependent on it happening on any particular schedule, or at all. Aurelio described this, near the end of our conversation about his own decade-long journey, with an image I think captures something true about the whole discipline we've explored together. He said it felt, by that point in his life, like the difference between a tree that bends anxiously toward whichever direction the wind happens to be blowing on a given day, and a tree with deep enough roots that it can simply stand, steady, regardless of which direction the wind currently comes from, still responsive to the world around it, still capable of genuine engagement and connection, but no longer fundamentally at the mercy of whatever happens to be blowing through on any particular day. That, I think, is the real destination of everything this journey has walked through together. Not silence for its own sake, not isolation, not a rejection of connection or recognition, but roots. A depth of internal foundation, built patiently through private work, private struggle, private proof, sturdy enough that the ordinary winds of other people's attention and inattention no longer determine whether you feel, on any given day, like your work and your life actually matter. In the final chapter of this journey, we're going to bring everything together and close with something quieter still, a simple, settled reflection on what it means to carry this discipline forward, gently, for the rest of your life. Chapter 15, The Work That Speaks for Itself. We began this journey with a moment you likely recognized immediately, the strange, quiet deflation that follows announcing a goal, the warmth of applause arriving before the work has actually been done, the fire that dims exactly when it should be growing strongest. I hope, by now, that moment looks different to you than it did at the very beginning, not as a mystery about your own willpower or discipline, but as something understandable, something almost universal, something built into the very wiring of a mind that evolved to care, deeply and automatically, about how it's seen by others. You know now, in a way that I hope has become genuinely useful rather than simply interesting, why silence protects what constant sharing quietly erodes. You've walked through the way premature recognition can drain the exact motivation meant to carry you through the hardest, most invisible stretch of real work. You've seen how an audience, even a loving one, subtly narrows what a mind is willing to risk, and how privacy restores the freedom to fail, to experiment, to wander into genuinely original territory that comparison would have quietly filtered out before it ever had the chance to form. You've considered the difference between working to be seen working and working because the work itself matters, and you've felt, I hope, the pull of that distinction in your own life, in ways you may not have examined quite this clearly before. You've thought about your closest relationships differently, not as audiences owed a constant narration of your progress, but as genuine partners in mutual knowing, deserving of a kind of sharing that's deliberate rather than reflexive. You've considered the strength that private struggle builds, distinct from crisis, distinct from isolation, a genuine stage worth honoring before reaching immediately for outside reassurance. You've thought about confidence, real confidence, the kind that doesn't waver when praise goes quiet, built not from what anyone told you, but from what you actually proved to yourself, alone, where no one else was watching. And you've held all of this, I hope, not as a rigid new rule to apply mechanically to every situation, but as a genuine discernment, a sharpened instinct for knowing when privacy protects, and when it's simply become another way of avoiding what eventually, honestly, needs to be shared. I want to leave you, in this final chapter, with something simple, because I think simple is what actually serves you as you carry this forward into an ordinary life full of ordinary decisions about what to share and when. The next time you feel the urge to announce something before it's ready, a goal just beginning to take shape, a project still finding its own form, a change still tender and uncertain in its earliest days, pause, just for a moment, before you speak. Ask yourself, honestly, what that announcement would actually be for. And if the honest answer involves wanting to be seen as someone already becoming what you haven't yet become, consider, gently, holding it a little longer. Let it stay yours. Let it grow in the quiet, undisturbed soil of your own private attention, until it has enough of its own shape and substance that it no longer needs anyone else's early reaction to feel real. This isn't about becoming guarded, or cold, or disconnected from the people who love you. It's about protecting something precious and genuinely fragile, the early life of anything worth building, long enough for it to become strong enough to withstand the world. And then, when it is ready, when the private work has done what private work is meant to do, sharing it freely, generously, without needing the reaction to tell you whether any of it was worth doing in the first place. Consider for a moment the shape of a life lived this way, not a life without recognition, without connection, without the real, eventual joy of letting good work meet the world and be celebrated, but a life where that recognition arrives as confirmation of something you already, quietly, knew, rather than as the desperate first evidence that your effort meant anything at all. A life with roots deep enough to hold steady, regardless of which way the wind happens to be blowing on any particular day. A life where your best work has the chance, finally, to become fully itself, before anyone else's opinion ever gets the chance to shape it. You don't need to apply everything from this journey starting tomorrow. transforming every part of your life overnight. That was never really the invitation here. The invitation simply is this. The next time something new begins to form in you, an idea, a goal, a quiet ambition you haven't told anyone about yet, notice the moment. Notice the pull to share it immediately, to be seen taking the first step, to receive the warm, early applause that feels so good and costs so much. And then, just once, try something different. Let it stay quiet. Let it be yours, entirely yours, for a while longer than feels comfortable. Work on it in the dark, patiently, without an audience, without applause, without anyone's early opinion shaping what it's allowed to become. And when it's finally ready, when the work itself has something real to say, let it speak. Let it walk into the room and be recognized for what it actually is, rather than for what you once, hopefully, said it might become. That is the quiet, powerful discipline this entire journey has offered you. Not silence forever, just silence long enough. Long enough for the work to become fully, unmistakably its own. Long enough for you to know, privately and completely, exactly what you're capable of, before the rest of the world ever gets the chance to weigh in. Go build something quietly. Let it surprise everyone, including you.